Today my group and I will be presenting our mission to Neptune. My name is Amber, and on my group as well we have Brandon, Carlos, and Isa. Next slide, please. Here we have our outline of what we'll be going over in our presentation. So first off, we have our mission overview, and then we have our introduction. After that, we'll be going over our modeling and assumptions and diving into what our technical calculations were, as well as our analysis. And then ending with a summary and going over what is in our appendix last. Here we have our mission objectives. So the objective of this project was to design a trajectory from Earth to Neptune. Within this, we have some other objectives as well. This includes performing a flyby around at least one planet, and then keeping a launch departure C3 below 130, having a transfer time to Neptune below 15 years, as well as performing our launch between June 2029 and June 2033. Some other optional objectives were to design a science orbit around Triton, as well as perform more than one flyby. Unfortunately, we're not able to get to this part of the project yet, but we did complete a launch window determination. Next slide. So this slide just highlights the main concept here, which was conducting a flyby or a gravity assist. So flybys provide extra energy to the spacecraft without needing to burn extra propellant. So here, the idea is that the larger the planet, the larger its gravitational influence, and so this makes Jupiter the perfect candidate for a gravity assist. Also, just a note that a spacecraft that is flying by a planet can also gather data of that planet. Next slide. Here is the critical results. So we had found 4 possible trajectories. This was the one that we ended up choosing, and it is a trajectory from Earth to Neptune via flyby, and it's starts on March 4th, 2031. It has a time of flight of around 11.5 years, and we'll go over more of this in following slides as well. So next slide. Here I just want to highlight the event timeline. So on the left, we see the first leg, which is from Earth to Jupiter. So our launch date is March 4th, 2031. We'll be arriving at Jupiter November 23rd, 2032. This accounts for a time of flight of 1.7 years. In our second leg, we'll be departing Jupiter and then arriving at Neptune on September 30th, 2042. This accounts for a time of flight of 9.9 years. Next slide, and I'll be handing it over to Carlos.
All right, so why Neptune? So Neptune is a pretty hard planet to observe. Its high amount of methane in the atmosphere makes it hard to be seen by telescopes. And there's also storms that appear every so often. So having a spacecraft in its orbit would be nice to have potential studies done on the planet. It also has 14 moons in its orbit. One of those moons is Triton, and it's one of the icy moons of the solar system, which is important because ice is water, and water is hard to come by in the solar system. And so having it in that orbit would be nice for these potential studies that can be done. So what assumptions did we make? We assumed that we were using the SLS Block 2 launch vehicle, that we had a spacecraft capable of a specific impulse of 350 seconds, that we were launching from the Alcantara Space Center in Brazil, and that we were assuming an arbitrary periapsis radius for capture orbit of Neptune. And then these are the physical parameters that we used for our calculations. So for the technical calculations and analysis, we determined that a direct transfer from Earth to Neptune via Lambert and via Hohmann transfer would exceed our 15-year time of flight requirement and not be possible for the C3 required. So we ended up using the pork chop plots program in order to find 4 optimal launch dates. Those are the launch dates on the side, and they are January 27th, 2030, February 27th, 2031, March 31st, 2032, and May 5th, 2033. So we use those pork chops, which you'll see in the next slide. So using the right-hand side pork chop, we were able to determine a C3, the launch date, and the time of flight required for that first leg of the transfer. And then we were able to use the left-hand side plot on the next slide in order to determine the total time of flight for the second leg of the trajectory using the numbers that we got from the other pork chop plot. We were able to put all those numbers into the interplanetary transfer program in order to match our C3s and determine all of the parameters that we needed and characteristics of the trajectory that we had chosen. And we use that in the next slide in order to determine our C3 of, we use the C3 in order to determine the usable payload mass of our launch vehicle. And we use an interpolation tool that we programmed into MATLAB right there as seen.
V infinity. So we also were able to use a MATLAB code, the interplanetary transfer MATLAB code, to solve for the V infinities. The code would just plop out numbers for us to test and use. And what did we use with what did we do with these V infinities? So with our V infinities, we were able to calculate the asymptote angle. And using our asymptote angle, we were able to then find eccentricity. And using eccentricity, we were able to find our periapsis radius. And our periapsis radius could be used to find the aiming radius. Here you can see that mu is in these equations. Mu2 is our gravitational parameter for Jupiter. And yeah. Here you can see the results for these for the different launch dates. And here at the top here, you can see the radius of Jupiter is 69,000, almost 70,000. And these launch dates we have are greatly above that, except for April 10th. But all of these mean that the spacecraft will not crash into the planet. If they did crash into the planet, we would have seen periapsis radii that were lower than the 70,000 we see up top. So here are the final results once the spacecraft finally arrives at Neptune. And we believe that the March 4th, 2031 launch date is our best launch date because of its relatively low time of flight compared to the others, but it also has enough mass to perform any potential course corrections that we might need to make in case the spacecraft could encounter any form of debris along the way. Here we can see the delta V. We need to find delta V to slow down the spacecraft enough to remain in Neptune's orbit. And here we also calculate the exhaust vehicle velocity. Using these numbers along with our final mass, which is around 1,500, we're able to find the initial mass, which will then tell us how much propellant mass we use throughout the entire transfer.
Since we had the 3 ideal launch dates, we also wanted to find the launch windows of when we should leave Alcantara Space Center. We got the ideal launch dates that we got from the porkchop plots, and we got information from the launch site, such as latitude, longitude, the time zone relative to UTC, the vernal equinox of that launch year, and the true anomaly of Earth associated with that year. Next slide, please. With those inputs, we saw a lot of the local time associated with the inclination and azimuth effective angle, but we narrowed it down to these windows because we took the inclination range we researched from Alcantara Space Center, the true anomaly of Earth at the vernal equinox year, and calculated the range of azimuth effective angles. And here we have the different launch windows we have for each 3 dates. Next slide, please. In summary, from the 6 requirements, we wanted to try the ballistic trajectory to Neptune, but we figured out that the direct transfer is not possible, so we figured that we needed a flyby around Jupiter at least. To fulfill the rest of our requirements, we took the porkchop plots to ensure that we had the best possible launch dates. We took the matching C3s to ensure that we are capable of holding a payload and that that the C3 did not exceed the requirement. And we also made sure that we performed at least 1 flyby around Jupiter to get to Neptune. Next slide, please. With our compliance matrix, you can see that we completed all 5 requirements and validated those using the interplanetary transfer code and the porkchop plots we ran. Next slide, please. And here we have in the appendixes the resources we used, the MATLAB scripts we created, and the Excels we created as well. Thank you for listening to our presentation.